Hey everyone, so today I want to talk about another synastry and composite chart aspect. I want to talk about the sun opposite the moon in both synastry and composite chart. I want to keep them in the same video because I think that they have some similarities, and I'll just kind of talk about differences between this aspect in synastry versus a composite chart. I'll start off by talking about this aspect in synastry. So if you don't know about oppositions in astrology, basically every sign has its opposite and partner sign. So Aries and Libra are opposite signs, Taurus and Scorpio are opposite signs, Gemini and Sagittarius are opposite signs, Cancer and Capricorn are opposite signs, Leo and Aquarius are opposite signs, and Virgo and Pisces are opposite signs. So anytime someone's moon is opposite your sun, or someone's sun is opposite your moon, and particularly when they are making a very close orb together, that's when you have this aspect in synastry. So you want to look at the orb. If your sun is at 27 degrees Aries and someone else's moon is at 27 degrees Libra, that is a very close opposition in synastry. But even just having the opposite sign, so like if your sun is at 27 degrees Aries but someone's moon is at 5 degrees Libra, it's not making the exact oppositional aspect, but some of what I say could still be applied to the dynamic between your sun and moon. So anytime someone's sun or moon is opposite your sun or moon, there's still going to be a similar theme. It's just the descriptions of the opposition in synastry are very applicable to those who actually have it within the orb aspect. And I'm definitely not talking about when this opposition occurs, but it's out of sign. That's not what I'm talking about. That wouldn't be a true opposition in this case. This can actually be a very energetically attractive opposition to have in synastry. The two people can be drawn to each other, and even kind of from a distance, like before you start forming a bond or connection, there can be this attraction to each other because both people are seeing in each other something that is very similar. So there's a familiarity to it, but it's also being expressed in a way that is very different from them. And the closer that the people get and become with one another, the deeper their bond becomes, the more that you can see this energetic flow between them, and it starts to become more natural to them. One of the biggest themes with this aspect in synastry is that there's a very good give and take dynamic between them, and that's usually the moon that plays more of the giving role and the sun that plays more of the taking role. And it can also be a very good leader-follower dynamic where the moon is playing more of the follower and the sun is playing more of the leader. And in synastry, this dynamic and this kind of back and forth flow between them can actually be a very good balance between them. It can actually feel fulfilling to them. The moon person feels very safe to the sun person. The moon person feels familiar, and they see in the moon person a similar orientation to how they are as the sun. It's kind of like the moon reflects the deeper layer, the deeper motivation of the sun. And the sun person is someone that the moon kind of looks up to because the sun is expressing like a more completed version of the moon person's emotional orientation. The sun is expressing what the moon is feeling internally. That introspective process of the moon is more whole and complete with the sun, and vice versa. What the sun is trying to portray and express and kind of create, the moon naturally reflects that and is supportive of that. So both of them see in each other more of their undeveloped qualities. So that can be very illuminating for the people involved in this aspect because they both have something that the other is missing. The moon person is looking for that guidance and that sense of direction from the sun, but the sun person is looking for that reflection and that emotional support and stability from the moon. This aspect is different from like a sun opposite sun aspect in synastry, in that they can actually be very supportive of helping each other develop these qualities that the other is missing. Because again, they see in each other something that is missing within themselves, but because the moon is involved, it adds a little bit of a softer approach to this aspect. You have to look at everything though, because if there's other hard aspects in synastry, like coming off of this opposition, then that can be challenging because the people involved will try to use this awareness kind of against each other, because that balancing act, the way that they're trying to help each other balance out, can be challenging for the people involved. So that's this aspect in synastry. Now I want to talk about it in a composite chart. The sun opposite the moon in a composite chart is very similar to the way that it is in synastry, but when you're looking at a composite chart, both people are playing out the aspects in a composite chart. So in synastry, it's one person being the sun and the other person being the moon, but in a composite chart, they're both kind of falling into this pattern or this dynamic. The composite chart is harder to interpret in that way because, especially with an aspect like this, with the sun and moon, there's still that flow of give and take, and you know, who's going to be the leader, who's going to be the follower. There is oftentimes a dynamic like that set in place where one of the partners is going to be more of the leader and then the other one's going to be more of the follower. And sometimes you can even see this showing up in different ways, like one's going to be more extroverted, one's going to be more introverted. There's kind of this like opposites attract thing going on, but they also can be very similar in some ways. They can kind of feel like they're two halves of one whole, and like they're playing these complementary roles in the relationship. Like one is usually more of the nurturer, the other one's usually more of the provider. It depends on the people involved in the relationship and who might play which role. But it's usually, just like in synastry, it can usually be very balancing and supportive to the people involved. And the people involved in this composite chart can feel like they have found someone who balances them out very well. If we're just analyzing this aspect alone, one of the main challenges to it is that it can actually exacerbate the tendency for the people involved to remain set in their roles that they play in the relationship. So they can become almost rigid in the dynamic that they play, in one being maybe more of the leader, the other one being more of the follower. And this aspect can be very challenging if you have two people who say are both natural followers or are both natural leaders. That can be very challenging because it can feel like they're being forced into a role that actually doesn't fit their natal personality. But if it does kind of fit their natal personalities, it almost enhances those qualities in their natal charts, and it makes it so that they're playing those roles in more extreme ways. So you can see kind of disruptions to the natural flow between the two people in the relationship in this composite chart if one person especially, or both people, start to kind of try to step outside of that role. It can be hard to then find that balance again in the relationship. So yes, it can be balancing, but it can also in some ways be stifling, especially if there are other hard aspects coming off of this opposition, like another hard aspect to Saturn or Mars or Uranus or Neptune, Pluto. Those can all add some tension to that dynamic. A really good example of the sun opposite the moon in synastry or composite charts is Billie Eilish and Finneas O'Connell. Finneas is Billie's brother, and they're obviously very famous, and for good reason. I mean, they are very talented. Their dynamic has always interested me, and I think that they play out the sun and moon oppositions very well. They have the sun opposite the moon in both their synastry and composite chart, and in synastry it actually goes both ways. Billie's sun is opposite Finneas's moon, and vice versa. Her moon is also opposite Finneas's sun. So Billie is a Sagittarius, Finneas's moon is in Gemini, and they make that oppositional aspect. Billie's moon is in Aquarius and Finneas's sun is in Leo, which means that obviously in their composite chart, they have the sun and moon opposite to each other. Billie being the Sagittarius sun and having the Aquarius moon, which are more social signs, like Libra through Pisces is the more social half of the zodiac. So that's when we're starting to focus on relationships with others more so than our relationship with ourselves. And Sagittarius is about the big picture of things. Gemini is about the pieces of that Jupiterian big picture, right? Gemini is like the parts of the Sagittarius's puzzle. And Aquarius is like the social outcome of the Leo individual creation. So when you look at their dynamic, Billie is kind of the leader, right? She's like the main star, the main focus. But she has gotten to where she is because of Finneas's support, and he's in the background, and he plays such a important supportive role in her career and in her life in general. And you can see that dynamic in how Billie, as the sun, Sagittarius, she's the main star and focus. She's playing out the sun role in their duo, but Finneas is the supportive moon. I listened to this interview by Finneas and I think he describes their dynamic very well. So I'll insert that clip here.
Billie loves, maybe more than I do, loves to listen to the thing we make. So like, I might kind of like the process more typically. Like that's kind of the breakdown of like the day where we sit and write and record the song. I might be kind of in my zone, and yeah. Billie might be a little like rolling her eyes at like how long it's taking me to do the drum beat, or you know, something like that. Sometimes it's a tedious process, but I kind of fuck with it, and then we finish it, and then I have a bounce. I send her an audio file, and then that's where like the joy kind of begins for her often, is she loves to listen to the thing she just was a part of making. She's like, that's a real like scratches an itch for her. So I think that's kind of our symbiotic thing.
It's showing that she is more focused on the bigger picture of what they're making, of their art. But Finneas is very good at supporting those pieces, those parts, and kind of focusing in on the heart of it. Because her sun opposite his moon is closer in orb than her moon being opposite his sun, I think that's a great description of that aspect and how it's playing out in their dynamic, where Sagittarius again is that big picture, that finished idea and outlook, and Gemini is all the parts, where Finneas, that's where he can support Billie. That's where he can be the moon to her sun. But Billie still looks to Finneas a lot for her influence, for guidance, for her direction. So her moon being opposite his sun is still playing out in their professional dynamic. And I imagine that it's definitely playing out in their personal dynamic. And her chart is more like top focus, like her sun and moon being in the upper half of her chart, having someone come into the bottom half of her chart, like, you know, Finneas's moon and sun, that helps balance the focus out in her chart. And it's more personal, right? The lower half of our chart is more personal because it's rooted by the fourth house. So that just kind of helps balance out, you know, her focus in her own natal chart. So naturally, because they have that dynamic in synastry, it shows up in their composite chart as well, which means that they probably have that give and take going back and forth. And maybe the challenge is when they have to take turns being the leader and follower. And sometimes they kind of, you know, go back and forth between who it is. But because it's Billie's work, I'm sure that she probably plays more of the leader in that dynamic.
There's a total hierarchy here.
Oh, there is? Okay.
Yeah, say my name and see the crowd response. Say her name, see the crowd response. If we both disagree passionately, like we make our arguments, and then usually one person dies on the hill. One person can't let go of it and the other one lets go of it. And that's really how we do it. And usually like the other one sees the light. The other one's like, oh, you were right about that idea. Like I feel like we've both done that a lot.
Yeah, we have.
The moon supports the sun in the sun's creative expression, but the sun is also made more whole by the moon's reflections and support. So both the sun and moon in this dynamic can kind of turn to each other as sort of guides for helping them develop those qualities that might not be as fully integrated into their personalities. So hopefully this video was interesting and helpful. Let me know what you think about these aspects in synastry and composite chart, what your experiences have been with them, and thank you for watching. I will see you next time.